paying us to do it too, you know.
I have to be honest, I had a terrible taste in films growing up. I enjoyed a lot of movies like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Big Fat Liar, Home Alone 4, and the live-action Scooby-Doo as a sampling, all films that have not been treated kindly by time. But one such movie I'd like to talk about is Daddy Daycare. Really, I think most people have just forgotten about this movie, especially since it was one of those high-concept family movies that got buried in low-budget sequels. But apart from Daddy Daycare's actual quality, why do I feel like defending it? Is there something redeeming about this unassuming family comedy that warrants a full video? Maybe, but I feel that analyzing this film could be a useful exercise for reevaluating similar content left in the bin.
Granddaddy Daycare.
Just swing it 1, 2, 3, and let it go.
We charge $100 a day.
If you'd like to follow along, I'd recommend watching the movie twice. Once before you watch the rest of this video, and once afterward. I promise you won't regret it.
You screw this up, I'm gonna kill you with my bare hands.
So without further ado, Daddy Daycare.
Alright, fellas, let's go!
There's actually a small amount of retrospective videos talking about Daddy Daycare. Topping them out is this review, which talks about how this movie fits in Eddie Murphy's long roller coaster of a career. But rather than getting bogged down in the execution of this film for the time being, let's break the film's plot down and get to the heart of the film. The film stars Eddie Murphy as Charlie, an advertising exec working at a food company with Phil, played by Jeff Garlin, and Marvin, played by Steve Zahn. Charlie's wife Kim, played by Regina King, is starting off-screen work as a lawyer right when two things happen. They enroll their son Ben into the best childcare place in town, a private preschool evocative of British boarding school, and a bad focus group for a veggie-flavored cereal leads Charlie and Phil to be laid off.
I lost my J.O.B.
You lost your J.O.B.?
Since Charlie is out of touch with Ben, and there's no safe and cheap alternative for childcare, staying at home is a bore for both of them. So while Kim pays the bills, Charlie is planted with an idea.
A daycare center, you and me.
And from there, they start it, they overcome first impressions, and they attract the ire of Angelica Houston's Miss Harridan. Marvin literally walks into the job, they deal with regulations, and the final conflict is whether to leap into a bigger place or let the whole thing undo itself. Naturally, it swings toward the latter until a rousing speech. And then it goes to the former for a happy ending. Okay, now let's dig a little deeper, and despite it seeming to cater to both kids and adults, this is very much a mature story. Not mature as in crude, but mature as in dealing with real-world stresses only an adult has to deal with. But first, the movie opens on Ben, and while the first things you might notice are the needle drop and this awkward pee joke, it establishes two vital details. Ben is potty trained, and he is self-starting. Some of you may recall Dan Olson talking about The Book of Henry, a film where the titular child is so mature and above it all for his age that it reflects on his mother Susan and creates an existential problem for the story, i.e., what is it about Susan that warrants being subservient to her own son?
None of her real problems are addressed, and the problem that is addressed was never truly a problem.
Daddy Daycare threads that needle by having two parents with full-time jobs, although by circumstance that condition only lasts one day. Through exposition, we learn that Kim stayed home after law school to raise Ben, while Charlie became a workaholic, or at least enough of one to keep him distant from his son, as well as saturate his vocabulary with business jargon.
As the members and facilitators of the Daddy Daycare team.
Believe me, as an Army brat, I've heard my fair share of jargon and slang.
Yes, Phil, this is a completely underserved market. Harridan has a monopoly on this whole suburb.
And then there's the family itself. Eddie Murphy gets blamed for cashing in on Shrek, but this is quite a unique scenario for him. Imagine, if you will, the guy who broke out with Trading Places being called up for a movie that not only has him in a comfy suburban life, but also chooses not to remark on their white-collar black family. It's also not the only film to pose that question, but we'll get there later. Instead, the movie chooses to focus on gender, which it's far more textual about.
So can't women do what men do and men do what women do?
The movie hinges on that very question as its selling point, Watch these dads become moms. Except, still dads. Let's not forget that pop culture feminism in the early 2000s was very prominent and very pro-empowerment, to say the least.
Now who's the damsel in distress?
We weren't quite far enough with trans awareness, let alone acceptance, but with this one-off joke, Jeff Garlin plays it cool.
I have to see 2 little girls because now I'm a big girl.
The important thing is that they, as dads, are fighting social establishment, not fighting feminism. They're not in it to teach their kids how to become big, strong men. They genuinely want to raise their kids.
First time today, I saw him playing, having a good time with the other kids, just being a normal kid. And that made me feel great, to know that I had something to do with that. We did that.
Crucially, though, it's not just babysitting or being forced to become a parent. These two decide to open up a proper daycare. It's as much a story of starting a business as it is a story of defying gender norms. Actually, it was Siobhan Hogan's character who planted the idea and helped them out in the first place. If she had more to do in the story, that would have said something. Now, a daycare run by men may be a gimmick, but it does help paint over what would be a bigger problem with this premise. Not every family in town is in the same rut as Charlie and Phil. So how big is their market if every mom can just stay home? Sure, Chapman Academy is a giant among terrible other choices, and yes, the well-to-do black parents passing judgment on a pack of white trash is even more hilarious with that detail. But I think the movie relies on the logic that some fraction of 300 laid-off workers all have kids of the same age and all distrust this traditionalist old lady pricing them out.
This is the price per year.
Oh, per month.
Harridan is a blunt instrument for the plot. She's treated like this cartoonishly conniving figure with a tenuous grip on authority that shrinks to the point that she has to sabotage a park event in broad daylight like she's Carmen Sandiego.
I should have crushed them in the beginning when they were weak.
It softens what could have been a great antagonist, but it's still clear what she represents to the story. Wikipedia helpfully links to hot housing, a practice of forcibly cramming knowledge into kids early in life. The late Irving Siegel gave this definition to hot housing in 1987 after having studied child development throughout the decade. In this paper, he muses on what that metaphor implies. It brings to mind a tomato plant growing in a greenhouse, an artificial climate, protected but sterile, where all sorts of chemicals and alien forces are used to force growth out of season, in a world artificial for a tomato plant. The tomato does not need a hothouse. It can grow outside in a domesticated state closer to its true domesticated nature. Its growth outdoors is not forced as it is in a hothouse, where it is made to grow out of season and under highly artificial conditions. And what is the outcome of the outside grown versus the hothouse grown tomato? Who really likes hothouse tomatoes? Remember when I mentioned Ben being potty trained and self-starting? Well, Charlie starts out both delegating and over-presumptive of Ben's wants.
Whoa, okay, that's what you wanted, right?
Milk.
Oh, you wanted milk? I'm sorry.
Of course, that creates our emotional through line, anchoring tensions between Charlie and Phil that become the backbone of the plot.
You know that rocket ship thing you do? Ben doesn't even like that.
Kim presumably did the work with Ben, but Charlie's complicated relationship with his son helpfully contrasts Phil's total avoidance of his son.
I can't.
The fact that Max is still reliably wearing diapers at his age is not totally rare, but it's treated as a symptom of Phil being unprepared to be a parent. It's almost a less crude version of the breastfeeding kid from Grown Ups.
Mommy, can I have some of her milk?
But despite how it gets resolved in a montage, it does give us the best and most memorable stretch of time in the film. It's not my favorite, though. My favorite is this.
Well, Ben likes broccoli, don't you, Ben?
No.
You turned my own sprout against me? Now you're gonna die!
So Phil has to learn to take on the responsibility himself, and Charlie has to learn to listen.
More, drawing?
Then, of course, there's Marvin. Still played as an awkward dweeb with unknowable hobbies.
I read Dr. Spock's baby and childcare book.
Marvin is the endearing man-child that can speak on level with the kids. Steve Zahn has a total fan base of his own because he adds charisma to any role.
They have nap time, but that's in my contract too, but that's not a union thing.
But in lieu of tensions, he's there for comic relief, letting the A-plot coast through other plot threads. One other thread, of course, is this focus group scene at the start establishes Charlie in a couple specific ways. First, he's all business. Being white-collar has its perks, but also its fair share of struggles. He rolls with the punches despite being low on the food chain, and he does his best to smooth talk when it clearly doesn't work. Second, he's assigned to sell healthy food to kids, but rather than something sensible like V8 Splash, he's saddled with Veggie-O! They make a big deal of having two mascots lead this focus group, but there's one problem. These are older kids. There's no way anyone here is younger than 6. And they have the appropriate reaction to dunking vegetables in milk. At this point, Charlie's established as totally out of touch with kids, failing to be a good businessman, and just far enough in denial about it that being laid off doesn't entirely bring it to light.
I'm a guy in demand, and I have a new job in a week. A week!
Sugary snack foods are just too popular. But of course, he soon gets to see how younger kids cope with sugar, plus dietary restrictions. And speaking of products, the movie uses generic brands sparingly, basically just Charlie's company, but the key plot points hinge around integrated pop culture references. Tony identifies as the Flash, Nikki speaks Klingon, and Marvin brings up a memorabilia store that becomes the Act 3 goal.
You know what he had? Tricorder.
Keep in mind as well that this was 2003, well before Disney and Marvel changed brand management forever. So Marvel had a movie not long before that was allowed to license Star Trek, Star Wars, DC, SpongeBob, and Dr. Seuss, and have it not be a big deal.
What have you been doing to these kids?
In fact, Sony's biggest self-reference is The Three Stooges, a far cry from the product placements of Ghostbusters and Jack and Jill.
Welcome to Royal Caribbean International.
Charlie works on an Apple PowerBook of all things. The needle dropping isn't even all that surprising, especially since Shrek perfected the art of balancing pop music and score just 2 years prior. You can look at Sideways' video on Shrek, or you can read my article on songs with the same BPM for more on the throwback trend. Which reminds me, did any of you my age realize that Walkin' on Sunshine was an 80s song? What with the inclusion of Jackson 5 and The Swede and the Ramones and Cheap Trick, the decades were all over the place, but skewed older. The music video even takes place in a dilapidated building like a punk song, but the song's very old school. Anyway, back to business.
Hey, that mother owe me some money. Hey man, that dude, that owe me that.
For my next point, I have to talk about the director, Steve Carr, and to help with that, let's start with the film Are We Done Yet? It was a sequel to the Ice Cube starring Are We There Yet?, but the story was based on a much earlier film called Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. Blandings is a wonderfully amusing film from 1948 about an advertising exec being lured into buying a god-awful country house, tearing it down, and building a new house from scratch. I'd very much like to talk about it another time, but let's move back to the film that ripped off its premise. It's pretty terrible and generic, but there's a similar willingness to cast a black family into a story of relative financial security. Not only that, they're both covert guides for how not to navigate their endeavors.
My wife having a baby right now. We can't talk.
I remember when I had mine. Yep, that's how I remembered it.
Steve Carr is best known today for directing Paul Blart Mall Cop, but what few people realize is that he started out as an album designer and music video director for Def Jam, a hip-hop powerhouse whose influence got him his feature debut, Next Friday, starring Ice Cube as a guy who moves in with family in the suburbs. See, they bought it with a lottery jackpot, but it didn't stop the hood from following.
Fake-ass Brady Bunch.
Carr also worked with Eddie Murphy on a sequel to another film, Dr. Dolittle, which...
Put your paws up! Put your paws up! Come on now! Is this some kind of joke?
Okay, this is getting out of hand.
You're looking fine! Coming at you, baby!
Let's just say the musical from 1967 was very racist and very poorly received.
Where crocodiles talk and elephants sing.
And making new stories out of whole cloth with Eddie Murphy was undeniably worth it, regardless of how good they were.
Slow down!
Shut up! I can hear you up there! Shut up!
So no matter how well Carr directed his movies, you cannot deny the influence of his roots. But he was also working with a screenplay written by this guy, Jeff Rodkey. Before Daddy Daycare, Jeff contributed to a pair of Beavis and Butthead episodes, and 2 books lampooning conservative figureheads. Daddy Daycare was his first produced feature, and Killer Movies says it's described as Mr. Mom meets Big Daddy. Of course, rewrites stacked up, and at least one scene put in the trailer was cut. So, unless we talk with Jeff sometime, there's no real way of knowing how the story evolved from that elevator pitch. What we do know is that it was picked up by producer John Davis. Davis also produced Dr. Dolittle with 20th Century Fox, who had first look rights on his films. But Eddie Murphy was also signed with Disney for The Haunted Mansion.
Hold on. With what?
And while 20th wanted to wait until after Haunted Mansion to star Daddy Daycare, Murphy chose to film the latter first. So 20th put the film in turnaround, allowing Davis to sell it to the hot new Revolution Studios, who had a distribution deal with Sony Pictures. It was filmed in late 2002 and released in May the next year. Afterwards, Rodkey got to revise The Shaggy Dog, and then watched his initial treatment for Daddy Day Camp get eviscerated into the generic slog that ended up on screen. Incidentally, that film was directed by none other than Fred Savage.
I'm a grown
And nobody
man.
does childlike innocence like you, Fred.
You know, it's a very unique thing being a young actor, to have kind of a common experience with them.
While we're here, one more fun fact.
All the time.
The spare crayon drawings in this scene were done by Bria Murphy, Eddie's then 12-year-old daughter. After breaking out as a model and actor, she is now an exhibited artist with her own dedicated following. This contribution is now just a small part of her life, but maybe with that fact you'll think about checking her out. In fact, despite his role, Eddie Murphy is famously close to his kids, and that is really why he took on kids' films, even if the end result to his reputation was out of his control. So there's relevant talent in this roster, but what really happened to the end result? I would chalk it down to a case of not signposting its intended audience. You could say a lot of films in the early 2000s, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, were like efforts to throw garbage at the wall and see what sticks. But family comedy at the same time, it was all about finding the right way to appeal to kids and adults. But there really is no guarantee in the execution stage of whether that fine balance tips one way or another. It doesn't help that Columbia's marketing skewed even more young, especially on home video. Would I consider Daddy Daycare a great movie? Well, a lot of what I brought up with race and gender and all that is best left appraised by people qualified to talk about it. As for the historical angle, I do think Daddy Daycare stands as a unique relic of the early 2000s, where gestures of inclusion and a new phase of family comedy coalesced into opportunities that, for better or worse, explored new takes on classic stories.
I give it 3 days.
Personally, I would love to see this movie remade, but not the way the family comedies tend to be milked dry. Instead, I think it should take advantage of new audiences, less kiddie and more wholesome, and take lessons from queer representation in the intervening 2 decades. What does it mean to be a daddy? What else goes into childcare? Should a movie of this kind rely on slapstick?
Ooh, you okay, Daddy?
But this is all wishful thinking. While this attempt failed to maintain an audience, I think it stands as a testament to genuine progress by making a leap on an original script and making a tight production out of it. And now, as you watch the film again, you can appreciate a pee joke you once swore to hate. Thanks for watching. There's more pop history where that came from. Follow the links down below, including my sources, and subscribe for more from me.